I'm Dwayne Brown tonight on a special broadcast of KPBS Evening Edition right after Big Blue Live. Tapping into the need to study DNA fragments, the new DIY lab open to expert and novice scientists in San Diego.
And thousands of California prisoners will move out of solitary confinement. I'm Peggy Pico with new rules for California prisoners placed in solitary housing units. Then, as the Carlsbad desalination plant prepares to open this fall, we get advice from Australia about their successful desal and drought programs.
I think people are ready to move past their disdain for cactus.
Move over water-thirsty plants, the challenges and opportunities for San Diego's North County. Ground zero for a must-have garden plant. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. A troubling trend tonight in San Diego County. Police say too many people are being killed by drunk drivers. KPBS reporter Matt Bowler explains why officers will be out in force for the Labor Day weekend.
This summer alone, 11 people have been killed in accidents involving drunk drivers. At a press conference today, District Attorney Bonnie Dumanis, flanked by San Diego County law enforcement, warns the county is on pace to surpass last year's DUI fatalities. Dumanis says the deaths need to stop.
This has been a summer of shame when it comes to fatal DUIs, and it needs to be a wake-up call for anyone who even thinks about drinking and driving.
San Diego Chief of Police Shelley Zimmerman worries about the coming Labor Day weekend. Zimmerman says drivers are 100% responsible when they get behind the wheel.
Because DUIs are all about a choice. Make no mistake, if you choose to drink and drive this holiday weekend, you should expect to be stopped by one of our law enforcement partners across our county.
The DA made it clear that if you're a drunk driver and you kill someone, the punishment will be severe.
If you're getting behind the wheel of a car, you better think twice about it, because if you kill somebody, you're going to be facing a life sentence.
It wasn't all bad news. Misdemeanor DUIs are down 29% this year. Law enforcement isn't sure why, but their hunch is the growing popularity of ride services like Uber and Lyft. Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
There is a new legal challenge claiming excessive force by a San Diego deputy. We want to warn you, this video may be disturbing. A lawyer for Robert Branch released this cell phone video. He says it shows Detective Paul Ward placing his client in a chokehold last May after the deputy allegedly threatened to cite Branch for reckless driving. Supporters held up signs for the driver today outside of the Hall of Justice. The driver says he feared for his safety because the detective was not in uniform and he drove an unmarked car.
In the process, he's now making it harder for all those decent, hard-working cops out there who realize they must earn respect, not demand it. Detective Ward, do you think fewer citizens are going to record their encounters with cops because you beat them up? No. Because of cops like you, we all have reason to turn on our cameras.
A sheriff's spokeswoman says the incident is being reviewed by the Internal Critical Incident Review Board. A landmark settlement today in a class action fight against solitary confinement in California prisons. It covers thousands of inmates. Peggy Pico explains how the settlement will impact nearby prisons.
The settlement ended years of litigation, hunger strikes, and human rights debates about a group of inmates kept in isolation for a decade or more to control prison gangs at Pelican Bay State Prison. Now, California's prison system will hold inmates they see as most dangerous together in small, high-security units with similar privileges as other prisoners. Alex Simpson, Associate Director of the California Innocence Project, joins me with how this will change things in our prison system. And Alex, why was the lawsuit filed back in 2009?
So this lawsuit is a class action lawsuit brought on behalf of people in solitary confinement in California, and the goal was to establish that the conditions and the restrictions that people had in solitary were really amounted to cruel and unusual punishment, and it was just simply untenable the way that it was happening. That was really just kind of the point that the lawsuit was trying to bring to light.
Briefly describe for us what it's like right now in a solitary confinement unit.
The best description that I can give you is one that one of my former clients told me, which is imagine, and you can do this yourself if you want to, lock yourself in your bathroom for 23 and a half hours a day. And you're going to have your food brought to you, but you don't leave that room. It's a little bit larger than a standard cubicle, and it's really very psychologically damaging.
What lands an inmate in solitary confinement, especially in relationship to this lawsuit? We're not talking about people who have done something wrong necessarily, right?
Yeah, and that's a common misconception that people have about solitary is that, you're in prison and then you commit some sort of offense and maybe you go to solitary for a couple of weeks or a month or something like that as punishment for that offense. Really what we do in California is your status as either a gang member or as some other person the California Department of Corrections has deemed you to be in need of additional confinement, and that can go for years and sometimes decades.
Has this been being used to control prison gangs, and if so, how effective has it been?
Well, it has been used to try to control prison gangs. As to how effective it has been, I don't know that there's really a lot of evidence one way or the other. However, it is true that prison gangs have not diminished in any way as a result of this policy. So it's, this lawsuit is really kind of showing that we need to take a different step.
So specifically following this lawsuit agreement, what will the new small housing centers provide for the prisoners who were previously in solitary confinement?
Yeah, and it's still a little new to determine how these areas will work, but essentially it's going to be a higher security, smaller facility within the prison, and the individuals who were previously in solitary confinement have a lot more privileges or ability to make phone calls or receive mail, that sort of thing. So we'll see whether or not this is something that actually works.
How will this be enforced, and when will it be implemented?
CDCR, just got this information today or yesterday, so it'll probably take some time to implement. I think CDC would like to say that, they've been trying to implement some of these changes for a while now, but, California has a very large prison population in solitary confinement, so it'll probably take some time.
Can you give us an idea of how large? Are we talking thousands here, hundreds?
California, I believe, has about 6,400 people who are in solitary confinement or in isolation in some way across the prison system. Pelican Bay is the largest supermax facility. Almost everybody there is in solitary confinement or some sort of isolation, but it's a large number.
Well, let's talk about this. The solitary confinement, that's not going away. That'll still be used. Under what conditions will that be used now?
The way that CDCR has kind of described it is that they're going to be looking at it on a case-by-case basis, that there will be people who are in solitary for offenses committed in prison, and people who, on a case-by-case basis, the department has deemed them to be in need of solitary. So it's not going away, but hopefully it will be used a lot less.
Is there any evidence of the impact, either psychologically or physically, on an inmate placed in long-term solitary confinement?
Yeah, and I think there's no real kind of dispute that if you put somebody in a box for 23 and a half hours a day, that it's not going to be psychologically damaging. People who come out of solitary after extended periods of time have problems with spatial relationships, they have problems with social relationships, and they just have a whole host of psychological issues that I think it really kind of be common sense that people would know that people would have if they're exposed to that.
All right, Alex Simpson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving forward at the state capitol, lawmakers advanced a right-to-die bill through an assembly committee today. The bill's author agreed to amend it to make it a felony for anyone other than the patient to administer the medication. Pressure from religious groups forced a similar measure to stall earlier this year. Governor Brown says the latest special session on health care funding was not an appropriate venue for the bill. The University of San Diego celebrated the grand opening of its new Institute for Nursing Research today. KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg says the complex will serve as the new home for the school's graduate nursing programs.
From the outside, the new three-story institute looks like it's long been a part of the USD campus. But on the inside, the institute has the latest computerized mannequins and well-equipped exam rooms. It even has 3 hospital suites where students will hone their technique on trained patient actors. Sally Brose-Hardin is dean of USD's nursing school. She says there's an enormous need for more nurse faculty.
And that's what this institute provides. We are preparing the nurses who will teach the next generation of nurses.
The institute will house 600 students who are earning their master's or doctoral degree. Kenny Goldberg, KPBS News.
The institute got much of its funding from Betty and Bob Beister, who are also contributors to KPBS. Patrons at a local public library can now check out more than books. KPBS science reporter David Wagner says a new lab lets them check out DNA, too.
Mayor Kevin Faulkner and other local officials attended the official launch of a community biology lab nestled inside La Jolla's Rifford Library. So this lab features DNA amplifying machines, microscopes, and other basic equipment. Today, school children were using it to extract DNA from strawberries. Laura Jordan-Smith of the Wet Lab, a San Diego group helping run this lab, explains why.
They're going to be looking at how we actually separate fragments of DNA to learn about the genetic code and do all kinds of other advanced experiments.
Do-it-yourself biospaces have been cropping up across the country, but Jordan Smith says it's unusual to have one right inside a public library, freely accessible to people of all ages. She says this lab will be open regularly as long as there's a trained volunteer on site to make sure people are using the equipment safely. David Wagner, KPBS News.
Running dry in California, growers and garden stores are adapting to California's drought. KPBS North County reporter Allison St. John explains why the North County is ground zero for cacti and succulent aficionados.
One of the people credited for popularizing succulents and cacti nationwide is Deborah Lee Baldwin. Her garden in the hills north of Escondido is full of the plants she learned to love as a child, growing up on an avocado ranch with a father who loved succulents.
What you don't realize is that you are in the epicenter of all things succulent.
Baldwin says the drought is just reinforcing what has been a growing trend.
So for decades, generations, we've had succulent specialty nurseries here in San Diego, and we've had collectors. But they were kind of the geeks of the plant world.
Baldwin's first book about succulents was published in 2007.
The general public was getting more sophisticated in terms of appreciating foliage over flowers, just as I was in my own garden.
Since then, Baldwin says, interest in succulents has exploded.
When I was researching designing with succulents in 2006, and I Googled the word succulent, I maybe got several 100,000 hits. If you do that now, you will get in the tens of millions.
California nurseries are taking advantage of this trend. David Ross, a buyer for Walter Anderson Nursery, says while sales of many traditional water-thirsty garden plants have fallen, succulent and cacti sales increased 25% in 2013 and another 20% last year.
It is definitely helping our business.
Ross says new and different varieties of succulents are coming all the time, and his cacti and succulent section has expanded.
It keeps creeping forward and taking tables from ground cover and bedding plants. The vegetable sales have stayed fairly steady, but the flowers have dropped a little bit, and then we've taken the whole fence line down to add in some other low water use plants.
Cacti and succulents make up just a small sector of San Diego's $5 billion agricultural economy. But the largest cacti and succulent grower in the United States, and possibly the world, is right here in San Diego's North County.
Ken and Dina, my parents, they started this business about 40 years ago in their backyard. They were avid plant collectors. They really were into cactus and succulents. It was a different kind of plant mix, and over time they got too many of them, and they had to start selling some of them, and that's how the business started, is they just started selling out of their backyard.
Since then, Altman says, the company has seen double-digit growth every year and now has about 1,300 acres, mostly in Southern California, devoted to succulents. Here at Oasis Gardens, north of Escondido, succulent cuttings of all kinds are monitored carefully and watered by hand till they get established.
It's called Portulacaria, and it's a native from Africa. It's actually, the common name is elephant bush, because the elephants love to eat it. but it's pretty indestructible, and it's an amazingly drought-tolerant plant.
Altman Plants started supplying big box stores about 9 years ago, and succulent and cacti sales have been multiplying ever since. The company employs 2 full-time succulent and cacti breeders who travel the world, bring back new varieties, and breed new hybrids with names like Crimson Tide and Neon Breakers that take years to develop.
So this is called Aeonium Mardi Gras. It's a really neat hybrid plant that our breeder Renee O'Connell came up with. It's a cross of 2 different aeoniums, and you can see the amazing color there.
Deborah Lee Baldwin says succulents come in every color except cobalt and royal blue.
There are more and more introductions. Plants that collectors were over the moon about and squealed with delight when they saw them are now commonplace. And just like a new invention, maybe in electronics, the price comes down, that's true too of anything that's perceived as rare and collectible. Now we're seeing it become more commonplace and more affordable.
And Baldwin thinks the cutting edge of this trend will be new kinds of cacti, which, though often sharp or spiky, are the most drought-tolerant succulents.
I think people are ready to move past their disdain for cactus.
Baldwin is very excited about a new variety of cactus apple with no spines,
which I call caressable cactus.
She says it not only needs no water, it's also fire-resistant, and she's planting it all along the edge of her garden. Finding land to meet the growing demand for these kind of plants is not easy, Altman says.
We're not finding huge tracts of land to grow cactus and succulents here, for sure. It's definitely a challenge, but there's opportunities here and there.
Altman Plants has expanded its growing operations to Arizona, Colorado, and Texas, but unlike some nurseries, the company has no plans to outsource their unique varieties to other countries where land is cheaper.
I guess hopefully, for many years to come, we can continue to farm here in North County.
San Diego's Flower and Plant Association lists about 45 commercial growers that grow cacti and succulents, and the region is home to some of the most respected specialty succulent growers in the country. At a time when many traditional crops and plants are struggling to survive under new water restrictions, succulents and cacti are not only blooming, but booming. Alison St. John, KPBS News.
As you may have saw earlier tonight, Big Blue Live gave us a unique window into marine wildlife. Now this is a live look at the shark cam at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. From a mud flat, young visitors can crawl inside to see how sea life survives, to prehistoric whales discovered in our own backyard. The Coast to Cactus exhibit at the Natural History Museum in Balboa Park is an experience like no other. A hands-on exhibit for the kids showing what animals live in the coastal mudflats and how they survive from predators when the tide goes in and out. Sea otters lived all along the California coast until hunters decimated their populations. Most now live in central California, including Monterey Bay. Almost everyone loves dolphins, but did you know?
This animal has adapted to living in the water, and it's changed from a limb that's for walking to a limb for steering.
The dolphin's nose has adapted as well. It's on top of its head.
Instead of being out in the front,
yes,
it's migrated over evolutionary time to this position here, so more efficient for breathing and swimming at the same time.
Tom Demaray is a paleontologist at the Natural History Museum. He actually climbed into the mouth of this finback whale to describe how the second largest species in the world, about 88 feet long, devours its food.
These animals have no teeth. They have racks of baleen that hang down, and baleen is made of the same material as our fingernail and hair, and it has a fringe on it, the hair-like material that's on the inside. They open their mouths, they engulf large volumes of concentrated prey. In the case of the fin whale, they'll eat anything.
Many types of whales can be seen off the coast of San Diego during the winter migrating season, but something you won't find in our waters anymore is this prehistoric ancestor to the California gray whale.
This animal is about 3.5 to 4 million years old. It was collected, again, in eastern Chula Vista, Otay Ranch residential area, at about an elevation of 400 to 450 feet above sea level.
The Coast to Cactus exhibit is on permanent display at the Natural History Museum in Balboa Park. Of course, we have an encore presentation of Big Blue Live at 8 tonight. This live series from Monterey Bay continues tomorrow night at 5, followed by a special broadcast of Evening Edition. Fines or jail time. Two possible outcomes for a Kentucky county clerk defying a Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage. She turned away gay and lesbian couples seeking marriage licenses this morning.
Today.
We are not issuing marriage licenses today. So
Based on what?
I would ask you all to
Why are you not
go
issuing
ahead
marriage
and
licenses today?
Because I'm not.
Under
Why?
whose authority are you not issuing
Under
licenses?
God's authority.
Did lawyers tell you? I don't
Did
believe
God
in
tell
your
you
God.
to do this? Did God tell you to treat us?
The Supreme Court denied Kim Davis's last-ditch appeal yesterday. Two gay couples and two straight couples sued her after she refused to issue licenses after the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriages back in June. A judge ordered her and 6 other clerks to appear for a hearing on Thursday. Reflecting on a vision of mercy, Pope Francis eases a long-standing church rule on abortion, making it easier for the Catholic Church to forgive women who've had abortions. In a letter published today by the Vatican, the Pope says he will allow priests the power to grant absolution during the upcoming Year of Mercy, starting in December. The announcement comes just weeks before the Pope travels to the U.S. and Cuba. Wall Street on a downturn again. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 469 points today. U.S. stocks sank 3%, the third worst drop this year. Markets went south after investors were unnerved once again by more signs of weakness in China. The news caused sharp drops in energy stocks and oil prices. Burning now at Memorial Coliseum in Los Angeles, the Olympic flame. The U.S. Olympic Committee selected L.A. as the nation's choice to host the 2024 Summer Olympic Games. The announcement comes after a unanimous vote by the L.A. City Council. Financial details still have to be worked out, but this gives L.A. a shot at becoming a 3-time Olympic host. Mexico's most prominent human rights icon came to Tijuana today to talk about the vulnerability of migrants. Father Alejandro Solalinde thinks Mexico's current administration has the worst human rights record in recent history.
As long as this government is in power, there will be no real hope for the human rights of migrants, of journalists, or us, their defenders.
He also criticized immigration policy proposals by Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, saying they're closed-minded and lacking in values. Trump has proposed building a wall between the U.S. and Mexico and deporting everyone living in the country illegally. Finding alternative water supplies, that's the goal of an international conference in San Diego. Peggy Pico takes a look at lessons learned in other parts of the world that may just help with California's drought.
The Carlsbad desalination plant is scheduled to open this fall. When complete, it will be the largest in the nation. Its goal is to produce enough drinking water for 300,000 customers by 2020 and up to 10% of the region's drinking water. Joining me with insights on droughts, seawater desalination, and environmental concerns are my guest, Neil Palmer, CEO of the National Center of Excellence in Desalination in Australia, and Matt O'Malley, San Diego Coastkeepers Legal and Policy Director. And Neil, Australia's so-called millennial drought lasted from 1995 to 2005. What similarities do you see between your country's drought and what's going on here in California?
It's pretty serious here in California, but ours went longer. The trouble with droughts is you don't know when they're going to finish. So it might rain next year, it might go for another 6, 7 or 10 years. They've talked about the very long period mega droughts in California that go for 50 years. So you don't know if you're in one of those droughts.
Well, I understand in response to the big drought in your country, a $10 billion seawater desalination program was started. It includes 6 major desalination plants around the country. How does that contribute right now to Australia's overall water supply?
Yeah, there's a difference in the west coast in Perth. The 2 desalination plants provide half of Perth's water. In the eastern side of Australia, rain fell, and so a couple of those plants have been mothballed. They're waiting like an insurance policy for when the next drought comes, which it surely will.
So not all are operating. Now, Matt,
No.
San Diego, of course, as we all know, is in our 4th consecutive year of a drought. But you've said in the past that desalination isn't the first place to start when trying to secure water for droughts. Could you explain that for us?
Sure. For us, desal is a prioritization issue. We think that we need to exhaust a whole lot of other issues first. First, conservation, first and foremost, and wastewater recycling. More often, we're looking for multi-benefit projects, things that benefit both water supply and water quality. If we're cutting down on discharges or capturing stormwater, we're keeping our beaches open longer, we're not discharging waste into the ocean. So we'd like to see those prioritized before we invest in really expensive desalination.
Are there environmental concerns that you have?
Sure. I mean, there's intake and discharge of brine and concentrate from the plant itself. There's also the associated energy. I mean, it's very energy intense, and unless you're using renewables for those energy, you will have greenhouse gases being emitted.
And Neil, how is Australia addressing environmental concerns related to their desalination plans?
Well, in two ways. Firstly, all the energy is offset by renewables, so they're basically carbon neutral. That's we pay extra for that, but that's something that I think the voters wanted. Secondly, the intake and outfalls of the Perth plants have not been found to have any environmental impact, and so I just can say that our experience should reassure the folks of San Diego that I don't think the Carlsbad plant will cause any problems.
Matt, in going on with this, what else do you think that we could be doing here that's not already being done? You mentioned conservation and recycling. If we take the idea that, look, not the environmental issues, because they may have been addressed, well, what else can we do?
Well, I think we're starting to see conservation now, especially with the mandatory regulations. We're achieving 25-30% countywide. We hope that's a permanent thing. At the end of the last drought, we started using more water again. If we can reduce the need, we can reduce the water supply. What the city of San Diego is doing, or others like Padre Dam doing the potable reuse, we're big fans of that, and we're big supporters of that project, because you're taking water and instead of discharging into the ocean. So again, multi-benefit projects that either capture the stormwater, are reusing water that's already here, or conserving and reducing the need by landscape alteration, adapting to our local environment.
And Neil, jumping back to Australia, are there other methods like this being used to deal with an upcoming or preparing for another drought?
Yeah, we've had water conservation campaigns. In Perth, we also reuse stormwater. About 25% of the water comes from stormwater. And we're building a new potable water recycling plant at Beanyup, which will go into the groundwater, much like Orange County. And so there is a portfolio approach, but at the moment, desal's a big part of it because that provides half of the water.
All right. Neil Palmer and Matt O'Malley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Gwen Eiffel. On the next News Hour, we launch Rethinking Race, a year-long series on solutions to some of the country's most pressing problems. That's Tuesday on the PBS News Hour.
A Spanish-language book truck is hitting San Diego County roadways. KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero says its mission is to keep the language alive among the children of immigrants.
A park by San Diego Bay was the first stop for the book truck. It's meant to promote Spanish language learning, especially among children of Hispanic immigrants. 6-year-old Kaylee Gonzalez picks out El Libro del Osito, the little bear's book.
I think it is good because my parents speak Spanish.
Kaylee's father, Ismael, says he fears his daughter is losing her native language now that she's starting school in English.
The little Spanish they know is as much as we can converse with them.
Children of Hispanic immigrants often lose their native language after becoming immersed in English language schools. The Mexican publisher Fondo de Cultura Económica sponsored the truck to fight against this. The company says bilingual students do better in the workforce, and U.S. researchers have found bilingual students do better in school. The truck sells mostly children's books.
That's what families most demand, because obviously they're interested in preserving their culture and language.
The book truck will be traveling to a new place in the county every day, and the publisher hopes to eventually expand the service nationwide. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
San Diego enjoying more mild weather this week. We are looking at 70s by the beaches after the morning overcast clears. 80s for the inland valleys and cooler at night, dipping into the 60s. 70s in the mountain areas the next few days, and triple digits for the desert. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Big Blue Live continues tomorrow night at 5, followed by a special broadcast of Evening Edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.